you're not alone. Trinity Helix AI. Trinity AI Legal. Trinity AI Support. Trinity AI SME. Trinity AI Data and Analytics. Our mission is 0 to 80.
Adam Wright from Trinity Helix. It's September 4th, 2025. In March this year, I was working with a client who I was helping to put together some long-term, very legitimate complaints against a number of bodies. And during my time with that person, it became clear they were going through an extremely difficult mental situation. I did my best to try and support them, but it became very clear that there was no immediate access, and through that period I arrived at a conclusion that perhaps AI, with some help, could be customised and could provide that vital bridge, I suppose, to offering some sort of mental scaffolding to help the individual. And from that, over the coming months, I began to develop a strategy to offer my technology and support directly to the charity sector, under the belief that it would be able to help millions of people, and that AI could be a platform to deliver low-cost services at a historically cheap price. And I was on the verge of delivering that message about 6 weeks ago when I found a report, and it was called Shaping the Future of the Charity Sector. And in essence, this report was how the charity sector itself saw AI. It was quite difficult to process, but I did manage to process it, and in doing so, I unlocked that actually the system that I developed, Trinity Helix, was exceptionally good at doing data analysis. In fact, it was uncovering insights at a rate 250% greater than the other tool I used, and I use regularly, the industry standard Gemini 2.5 Pro. And then I guess a couple of events, I began to get a bit more uncomfortable, just the nature of the reports. I looked at my own situation, how I believe the family courts have been massively abused over a period of about 10-15 years, and it had really become, well, a really negative impact on society. And then 2 weeks ago, I saw a documentary called The Real Fatal Attraction, which again seemed to show systemic issues with the Crown Prosecution Service, and even more digging. Men were just being, by the tens of thousands, were being arrested at a rate that wasn't comparable with any other democracy in Europe or the world. And then 10 days ago, I saw a report issued to through Sky News saying that 10 charity leaders had written to the Home Secretary on the basis that they were seeking for children to be better protected under a VAGW policy. So I guess I started thinking I need to go and figure out what's going on. And so for the last 2 weeks, I've been doing a lot of meta-analysis, and I've come up with some really uncomfortable findings. I'm going to share them with you now. And when you see these findings, it sort of makes sense. There's a lot of talk around we've become a victim culture, and I was very surprised to learn that the UK charity sector is now a £96 billion business. It's an industry, and it's not only an industry. If you go back to 1985, 1990, it was about 15 billion, and at that point in time, it was about a third or a half of the defence budget. Now it's more than double the size of the defence budget. It's grown at a rate, when you average everything else, median against all industries, of 250%. And actually, when you look at the rate above which it's grown beyond its natural rate, it's gobbled up in the period between then and now an additional £1 trillion of direct cost. And from what I can see, has had indirect costs of something similar, because it's I guess if you've developed a sledgehammer of a charity sector, it's not just a hammer looking for a nail. You're developing a huge resource that needs to find people to help, victims. And I'm left with a very uncomfortable conclusion that the unintended consequence of this charity sector is just to become a haven of just bad practice, not just the report. So, and I'm going to release a series of reports called data loss, because fundamentally, from what I can see, there's been some terrible. I mean, being able to run metadata reports is quite a recent thing. We have to acknowledge that. But even so, routinely, data that doesn't fit the purpose of the narrative is deleted, not counted. and the best example I can give is something I had no idea of, but it's a story of Erin Pizzey, who was the founder of the world's first women's refuge in Hammersmith in the 1970s. She was the original goat. Now, through her work, she reported that actually it was very difficult to tell these complex relationships. In her view, the women were just as violent as the men. And the backlash that led to was, I was too young, I just didn't really know what was going on then, much too young. But she was, for making an observation, which saying that the women can be violent as men, she was subject to death threats. Bombs were sent or threatened to be sent to the refuge. She had to have an armed police guard, and she became so ill she had to leave the country. Which kind of makes the point somewhat, don't you think? And yet she's been scrubbed by the records. And scroll forward, and the charity sector is so large, it has sectors within it. And you have a whole domestic abuse industry that's denying the existence of Erin Pizzey because it doesn't suit them out. So, unfortunately, it's good news, bad news, because much of this 96 billion, as you'll hear, is being covered for by the state or by the misappropriation, I believe, of significant monies being paid for by social media in terms of their increased responsibility around public distribution of news and stuff like that. Lottery funds. All money that could be used for much better things. And I don't know exactly, but I'm going to have to re-verify all these figures because I've come to learn there are some checks that need to be made on deep research. But my initial findings are, on the one hand, they're very deeply disturbing because you have an industry that seems to be taking no account of its own bias. The classic example of a group of people federated away from reality who come to believe that they're operating in the best interest of everybody, and they fail to see it's their own status and their own self-interest. So let's hear what the report says.
Investigating pretty significant hypothesis today. Welcome to a deep dive that might fundamentally challenge how you think about doing good here in the UK. We're investigating pretty significant hypothesis today. Has the UK charity sector really shifted from its roots in, voluntary public support into what some people are calling a state-funded industrial complex?
That's exactly right. Our mission really is to unpack how these funding structures have, profoundly altered both accountability and societal impact. We're looking over the last 4 decades, roughly 1985 to 2025, and I think you might be quite surprised by the shift in who truly influences these powerful organizations and what they prioritize.
Okay, so let's unpack this. There's a crucial distinction we need to make, right? To clarify the landscape, we're talking about 2 main types of charities. Mm-hmm. First, let's call them Type 1, or publicly accountable charities. These are the ones getting, say, more than 10% of their income directly from the public. So donations, legacies, community fundraising, that kind of thing.
Yeah, their survival really depends, in a way, on that public consent, on public goodwill. And then you've got Type 2, the institutionally funded charities. Now, these get 90% or more of their income from government grants, contracts, big foundations, maybe corporate partnerships.
Right.
And what's really fascinating here is trying to understand, where does their primary allegiance lie? Who are they strategically focused on pleasing?
Because our audit, looking at the top 5,000 UK charities, it shows a really stark division. It's quite something. A staggering 77% are Type 2.
77%.
Yeah. And they control about 81%. That's around 77.5 billion of the entire sector's income.
Which is huge.
It's huge. And it means their strategic priorities, they often align more closely with those institutional.
It's worth dwelling on this for a moment. Because actually, this figure here is... So in other words, it suggests that there was the existing core, the RNLI, Imperial Cancer Research, the charities that have been around forever. Because, of course, the British were one of the first people to formalise charities, and we've got this deep resonance with the charity. We sort of fundamentally believe in it, but it's developed in this huge... black hole of a blind spot that's now consuming, look at this, 77 billion direct costs a year. I mean, it's and not and well, let's have a listen.
Funders, don't they?
Absolutely, more than with the general public, who might still think of themselves as the main backers. And you see this correlation quite clearly. Type 1 charities, they often lean towards popular causes, things like medical research, where public support is naturally strong.
Makes sense.
But the Type 2 organizations, they dominate areas like social services, housing, legal aid, advocacy.
The areas where the state seems to have increasingly outsourced its responsibilities.
Exactly. Those very areas.
Which brings us to a really interesting point, doesn't it? This 40-year trajectory. From 1985 to 2025, we've seen a pretty dramatic shift in the state's role.
Yeah, the data is quite clear on this. Government funding to the charity sector has significantly increased. It's projected to hit around $20 billion by 2025.
20 billion.
But over that same period, look at UK defense spending as a slice of GDP. It's dropped from 4.3% down to about 2.3%.
Wow.
And social housing stock plummeted from 5.5 million homes down to 4.1 million.
So, okay, the state's stepping back from providing these core things directly. Defense, housing, what does that actually mean for the charity sector then?
Well, it looks like the state has moved away from direct provision, as you say, and instead it's increasingly funding the third sector, the charities, to manage the social consequences that pop up because of...
Well, even that's not clear, because when you look at these services, the idea that they would all even be necessary is not even clear, because they contain things like fact-checking and a whole plethora of services. It's almost as though the monster is generating the services it ends up providing, if that makes sense. And you just have to think about it logically. You know, what has fundamentally changed since 1990? Not that much, right? Not that, or some things have as a direct result of all of this. But if you think of it, like, what services was the government providing in 1990 that extra services need to be provided now? And I would maintain, not that many. Not that many.
Of that withdrawal.
Creating a kind of feedback loop.
Precisely. Problems grow, maybe linked to less social housing or other factors, and then the demand for charity services grows, and so the funding needed also grows.
Right.
We can see this dynamic quite clearly if we look at the domestic abuse sector as a sort of case study. It's grown massively, hasn't it, into a multi-million pound, largely state-funded industry. And we see a strong correlation between this boom in state funding and a dramatic rise in certain legal interventions.
For instance?
We'll take non-molestation orders. These are legal injunctions aimed at preventing domestic abuse. Applications just soared over 8,000 in only the first quarter of 2025. That's up 5% in just 1 year.
Goodness. And that correlates with what?
It correlates with about 2.5 million separated families in 2024, many of whom then need state housing, welfare support. You see the connection.
Okay, so this raises a really...
No, there's a deeper connection here. My analysis shows that in the let me get this correct. In the 1970s, Britain had a population of about 55 million, I believe. And between the 70s and today, we built about 11 million houses. And the population's gone up to 68 million. So we've added 13 million people and built 11 million houses. So the argument that now, although we have an ageing population, the homeless crisis is being generated by social policy, where you would argue that people are less and less encouraged to form long-time partnerships, so they have these fragile structures where they just cohabit. These structures are disturbed, can be radically disturbed by this wave of non-molestation orders, which has gone on the most incredible rise, again, that's not supported by anything, which has seen tens and if not hundreds of thousands of families over the term additional separated, where you then are left up with often with the most of the time, although domestic abuse is 45, 55, something like this, in almost all situations the male is the one that is just leaves the house at very short notice, has to seek housing, and you then leave a single person family structure. And we've done reports on those structures, and the effect of those structures on the children and the individuals are harmful. So we're sort of perpetuating a model of damage upon ourselves. I mean, it's It's mind-blowing, really.
Important, maybe uncomfortable question. Is the sector's main solution, which often seems to involve family separation, is it inadvertently generating the very statistics that justify its own growth, its own funding?
It's a critical question to ask. And there's a historical tension here. If you look back at Erin Pizzey, who founded the world's first women's refuge back in 1971, her own observations, published at the time, suggested many women seeking refuge were, in her words, involved in reciprocal conflict. She saw it as a complex issue, not one-sided.
But that nuanced view didn't prevail, did it?
No, it was systematically marginalized, sidelined by a growing movement that adopted a perhaps simpler but politically very powerful narrative.
The patriarchal oppression narrative.
Exactly. And that framing really shaped the sector's ideology for decades. Pizzey's foundational role was, well, largely erased from the story.
Okay, so this brings us to the idea of a societal balance sheet. The state often says...
Again, it's so fascinating because you have to constantly press AI to kind of cover this. I just highlight it here. Here we go. The backlash. I mean, I was trying to think of a character that had been subject to this much vilification. And the only person I could think of that came anywhere close in my living memory was Salman Rushdie when he wrote the Satanic Verses. I mean, unless I'm missing something, I cannot think of a character so vilified as this. Look at this. The backlash against Pizzey was severe and systematic. She was subject to a campaign of vilification, death threats and bomb threats. Militant family. She required police intervention. She was picked at public events, placards saying all men are bastards. And she's like the outlier to keep the whole thing true. And of course, when you do, you can think what you like, of course, and you can even tell your friends what you like. I mean, I'm a great believer in free speech. When it comes to public policy, imposing your view on others, particularly when you don't really have sight of what's happened, and you're trying to impose a deterministic logic to an event you don't really understand, well, then clearly it is a problem. Clearly, you cannot... she's even been her story's even been deleted from her own charity, which I believe is now, I'm not entirely much, it's called Refuge, I believe. I mean, it's just mind-blowing. I mean, I had no idea, and I'm sure the vast majority of the population have got no idea what's going on here. But when you think of it, we've got this sector that's grown not exponentially, but it's grown, it's huge. So more than double the size of the defence budget. And bear in mind, our defence budget is really the highest in Europe. Okay, so it's become a sledgehammer that must have nails.
As outsourcing is more efficient, saves money.
That's the rationale, yes. But our analysis suggests it might be a kind of false economy.
Yeah.
They've essentially traded maybe higher upfront, long-term investment in things like stable housing and strong families for short-term capital savings.
And the result is?
The result looks like a much larger perpetual bill down the line. Look at housing benefits, a $14.7 billion budget for DW just for 2024-25.
Wow.
And overall welfare payments.
Yeah.
Family breakdown is a major driver of the UK's huge total welfare spend, which is $287.7 billion.
A massive figure.
And the ultimate cost might not just be pounds and pence. By professionalizing all this social problem solving, are we risking eroding the actual fabric of civil society?
Oh, so.
Well, potentially supplanting those organic community supports, family networks, neighborly help, replacing it all with a bureaucratic service delivery machine. And that can lead to what some call policy monocultures, where one dominant funded approach kind of stifles other diverse, maybe more local solutions.
So our deep dive seems to confirm it then. The UK charity sector has, at least in large part, transformed into this charity industrial complex.
It certainly looks that way, and it has profound consequences, hollowing out the traditional meaning of charity, fostering these monocultures we mentioned.
So thinking about this, when you engage with charities, or perhaps hear their calls for policy changes.
Remember this, a charity's accountability structure, who funds it, who it answers to, that's just as important as its stated mission or cause.
Right. So for you, the listener, maybe a final provocative thought to take away. What if, before you donate, or before you just accept a charity statement at face value, you made it standard practice to ask, who is truly funding this organization? And ultimately, who are they accountable to?
It's a crucial question, really, for understanding how things work today.
Well, a final example, I've done some analysis on the 10 companies that publicly lobbied the Home Secretary to find out that the average wage of the people running them was more than the Home Secretary was getting. Loads of, I think 7 out of 10 earn well over £100,000, and it's become routine to not even declare where the funding comes. So a charity might say we get public donations and then not state them. I mean, I set the bar very low here. The Type 1 charity, which is a charity deemed to be supported by the public, is a charity that gets only 10% or more actually from the public. That's quite a low bar, right? I mean, on the one hand, I need to check. Here are the sources, and what's also always useful to do is what I do here is I just show you here. We go through the thought process, and you can see what the AI's this is an agentic report, so it's not just me asking AI. This is AI really trying to understand what it has to do, going out and researching it. In terms, it's you can think of it as a metadata report. So basically, and these are quite popular and hugely powerful because they're taking a lot of existing reports and aggregating them. So that's its first wave. Comes back and it thinks about it a bit more. It goes out again. Comes back and thinks about it, but goes out again. Goes away and thinks about it. Now, the other thing to say here is that until very recently, a citizen would be incapable of doing research anything like this. This search would be done by universities and by charities and by think tanks, which are charities. So another thing that this sector has captured is all the machinery needed to do the analysis. And what I found upsetting really is just what appears to be a really shameful ability to look at the long-term effects when you look at the family court. We know the impacts in terms of children that grow up in a single-person household. It's not good, and it really we shouldn't be surprised because for this to be presented as some sort of norm, there is no point in history when this has ever been normal. Okay, so I have a whole raft of I've been looking into this for about 2 weeks, and every single place I go to look, it's terrible. And I suppose the good news is, Britain is having a difficult time. And if you imagine that just looking at non-molestation orders, of which I've been subject to a completely outrageous process, I've had a lived experience here. It doesn't matter if you're innocent or guilty or not. It's just what is said in the courts at that time. And it's also, once it's happened, it's impossible to get any justice, as I will fully document. But if you imagine, I'm going to do a further report called "The Manufacturing of the Mob," because plus it looks like we're actually arresting, in many cases at work, tens of thousands of men on charges of rape on the basis of what someone has said. Okay, you could have something like annually 30 to 40,000 men being completely abandoned by their country on the basis of an ideology. So the next time we see the news, and it might well be that the asylum seekers are just sort of, it's about blaming the player, not the game, because they're in a hotel, and you might think, well, that's nothing, but there's tens of thousands of people that are effectively homeless. So we could turn the ship around, because clearly this is just completely wrong, and it's never happened before, which is good. But say when we count up the cost of this social experiment, it's going to be, from what I can gather, the direct cost over and above had this sector grown naturally. Going back 30 years is £1 trillion, which is 1/3 of the public debt. Now, if you just think of the interest that we're paying on that public debt, and you add that into this, the initial costs that I'm calculating be 65 billion a year. At a time where we're arguing about whether pensioners should get a winter payment, and we are screwing to the wall veterans, men and women that wore the uniform to fight for their country. We're shortchanging them, okay, and we're funding this. Thank you very much.